For centuries, the Appalachian Mountains have sustained their people through a system that doesn't rely on tilled rows or purchased chemicals. By building food forests, layered communities where trees, shrubs, and herbs grow together, families created landscapes that produce more food with less labor every single year. Once established, these forests can produce for decades with almost no maintenance. This strategy fed the mountains for generations, and it costs nearly nothing to start. In a conventional garden, every tomato or ear of corn you harvest pulls nutrients out of the ground. It is a linear depletion economy. To keep growing food, you have to continually replace those lost nutrients with external inputs like bagged fertilizer. Long before European contact, the Cherokee and other eastern woodland nations managed a much more efficient system. They actively designed edible landscapes that mirrored the wild forest, selectively transplanting wild foods to create dense, self-feeding ecosystems that functioned for centuries. When Scots-Irish and English settlers arrived in the mountains in the 1700s, they found a landscape where cleared farmland was incredibly scarce. Out of pure geographic necessity, they adopted this indigenous model to survive on small, wooded plots. Families planted fruit trees at the edges of their property, tucked berry bushes underneath, and let wild herbs self-seed at the ground level. They were deliberately mimicking the natural architecture of a woodland edge to maximize their yields. By doing this, they built a biological engine. Within a decade, a small woodland corner produced far more food than a cleared, cultivated field, while requiring a fraction of the daily labor. Modern permaculture eventually mapped out exactly what these families practiced intuitively. This diagram shows the core framework, stacking 7 distinct layers of native edible plants into the exact same vertical footprint. Up top, you have the canopy layer, large nut and fruit trees like chestnut and apple. Right below that sits the sub-canopy layer for smaller, shade-tolerant native trees. Beneath those, you fill in the shrub layer with dense berry bushes. Then you build out the floor. You plant an herbaceous layer of perennial vegetables, a creeping ground cover layer of edible greens, a root layer for underground crops, and finally, climbing vines train directly up the trunks of the canopy trees. To make these layers actually feed each other, you use a guild. This is a biological operating system where specific support species are planted in tight rings around a central fruit tree. Instead of buying pesticides, you plant chives right at the tree's drip line to block apple scab fungus, and you lay down nasturtiums as a living ground cover to actively deter aphids. To manage fertility, you use comfrey. It is a dynamic accumulator, driving a taproot 6 feet into the subsoil to mine raw minerals and pull them all the way up into its broad surface leaves. When you cut those leaves and drop them on the soil, they decompose rapidly. This delivers a massive, free burst of nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus directly to the shallow roots of your fruit tree. The guild system uses engineered biological relationships to do the exact jobs you'd normally pay for at a garden center. It turns the forest into a completely self-fueling system. The sub-canopy layer is where you put America's forgotten native superfruit, the pawpaw. It produces massive 25-pound fruit loads that taste like a cross between a banana and a mango. Because it evolved here, it faces zero native pest pressure and requires almost no maintenance to thrive. In your shrub layer goes elderberry. You can propagate it for free just by pushing a cutting into damp ground. It can grow to 10 feet tall in 2 years, giving you huge harvests of berries with proven antiviral properties. Below ground, Jerusalem artichokes yield up to 5 pounds of edible tubers per plant with zero care. In the deepest shade, you can establish colonies of ramps, a highly prized wild leek that provides your first harvest of the year in deep shade. Above it all, the native mulberry acts as a heavy-duty multiplier. A single mature tree yields hundreds of pounds of berries every summer, demanding no sprays, no fertilizers, and virtually no attention. This circular calendar tracks the harvest windows of those overlapping layers. When you stack these specific native plants, you create a ground-level production flow that spans the entire year. Ramps emerge in early spring, before the canopy even leaves out. By early summer, your mulberries are dropping fruit. Late summer brings the pawpaw harvest, and through the dead of winter, you can dig up those stored root crops as you need them. By selecting native complementary species, a single plot of land begins to function as a self-sustaining cycle, producing food 12 months a year. This chart compares a 400 square foot vegetable garden against a food forest over 10 years. Notice the complete inversion between labor and yield. In a food forest, annual harvest value scales past $1,000, while manual maintenance drops to 2 or 3 hours a year. You can start this entire system with almost no budget. Local gardening groups are always giving away excess comfrey roots and elderberry cuttings. You can check with your state's native plant society for free saplings, or simply propagate wild fruit trees from seeds collected in the fall. To prep the ground, you skip the tiller completely. You use sheet mulching. Simply lay cardboard directly over your grass, cover it with a thick layer of free wood chips sourced from local arborists, and plant your new cuttings straight through the mulch. Your action plan for this weekend is simple. Find the sunniest corner of your property. Look up the native plant list from your county extension service. That's a free local agricultural resource. And plant your first 2 trees. This biological system will easily outlive and outproduce a conventional tilled garden. It builds soil while producing food, compounding its own returns year after year. Appalachian families sustain themselves from land that was designed to feed itself. Unearth the History brings you the mountain wisdom of the food forest. Plant your first layer, grow your first free harvest, and subscribe to keep the legacy growing.